Where did you meet your co-founder, by the way?
Yeah, like online dating now. I'm kidding.
If you look at SaaS startups specifically, about 21% of them fail in the first year itself.
The construct of SaaS can change from one where you're helping someone doing the task to actually doing the task. And that's where the opportunity is.
Even while you looked at Betafi as a global product, did you had to personalize and localize as per the local geographies?
Yeah, that's a great question. What was interesting is out of the 7 geographies, it actually failed in 5. And the main reason where it failed in 5 is because they copy-pasted GOMO. But I think what they should have picked up was learnings.
So the other geographies, where it didn't do well, did you actually figure out certain reasons why it didn't do well?
You have to look at the local competitive landscape. When there are 15 brands and the 16th brand in the market, it's very, very different from a customer perspective. But in telco, there's always this risk of cannibalization. So Thailand was always scared of cannibalization of the product, and as a result, they didn't push it out as much as they could. And I felt that if they did, it would have done better.
How can startups sort of compete with international market?
The reality is a lot of those US products are built for a US construct, but for an end enterprise, you have to build it until production. I think one opportunity I see for Asian companies is to build like production ready AI. Another opportunity I see is because of the success of ChatGPT, all the AI implementation is very chat focused in terms of its interface. I don't think that that's the end state. What does the AI native world look like? I think it has not been built yet.
Imagine building a product that is not only innovative, but it scales globally across different industries, right? So welcome back to Build with Shreya podcast, where stories and ideas inspire you to create something extraordinary. Today we have with us Arjun Arora, who is a graduate from National University of Singapore and University of Pennsylvania. And he started brainstorming different ideas on the bustling streets of Singapore. He worked with companies like Singtel, Optus, also launched a digital platform, GOMO. And today he is here with us to discuss more about the SaaS industry, which is a short form for software as a service. So let's see what he has to share with us with specifically his last startup, which was Betafi. And that was a UX research platform. So let's hear for Arjun Arora. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, I think it's something that individuals start developing very early on. And I think one of my first stints as an entrepreneur was when I was a kid, and I set up this little counter along with my friend just outside our home that was selling hairbands to passerbys, and then followed by when I started learning coding, then building websites with pixel art and attaching Google ads to it, making some revenue out of it and all of that. So I want to understand about your journey. I know that you were part of starting your own thing while at school. You were also part of Entrepreneurship World Cup as well in Singapore. So tell us a little bit more about that experience, and then how did your school help in inculcating that entrepreneurial bug inside of you?
So I moved to Singapore when I was 15. I was studying in India till 9th and I moved to Singapore. And I remember there was a problem that we couldn't bring a lot of luggage. I used to bring a lot of stationery, a lot of shampoo, Maggie, and would always be overweight. So the first thing was, in India, a pen cost like 5 rupees, 10 rupees. And in Singapore, it cost 2 Singapore dollars. And my whole budget for the month was just $200. So I used to bring like 10 pens and 20 pens. And I used to just give away to my classmates. And then someone gave an idea, why don't you sell it, right? So we used to buy a pen for like 10 rupees, and then we sell it for 150, which is still a lot of cheaper in Singapore. And we bought a batch of 500 pens and we sold all of them. And the profits we used to buy chalkboards for kids in somewhere in UP, my friend's village. So that was a very easy like arbitrage opportunity. And I think one of our teachers saw that we were up to something. And initially they wanted to ban us, but they thought it's cute that we are doing that, and they encouraged us. So there was a competition called SAGE, which was Students for the Advancement of Global Entrepreneurship, which they give you a year and some budget to run some businesses. And at the end of it, whoever does well then represents Singapore, or they win Singapore. So we started multiple businesses. One was like a t-shirt business when there was like orientation. So at that stage, you don't think so much about tech, but like, where's the opportunity? Just like pen was an opportunity, t-shirts became an opportunity. Then Valentine's Day came. So we used to buy like 300 roses and then it was full of like thorns and content and stuff. So we used to get like people to volunteer their time to cut it because we couldn't be bothered, then wrap them, and the profit margin was like 90%. So throughout the year we would do sell Pepsi in a marathon, sell t-shirts. We even did like some climate initiatives and sold tickets. So multiple initiatives, and across them we got revenues of $50,000, and we won the Singapore leg and then represented Singapore in Brazil.
And then how was that experience?
Eye-opening, because actually Nigeria used to win the competition, which was very surprising. Singapore, US, all these other countries didn't win. And I was surprised at the kind of support that they have. So they had like a student-run cafe, like a proper cafe within their school. They had a student-run like early EdTech program. So it was very inspiring. We were selling t-shirts, they were building EdTech programs also in school. So the leveling up of an international competition was really good. But I think just day to day, it was just a very good reminder. You just have small ideas like before a Valentine's Day, people need roses, and most people will buy at last moment, right? Or you go for a marathon and the vending machine is 100 meters away, people will pay extra for the Coke. So
Valentine's Day is just around the corner
Yeah.
this year. Probably the new school kids in Singapore can
yeah, they get
still
inspired,
get
right?
inspired for
Yeah,
sure.
I think the standards of what is acceptable has changed, so people expect more than before. But actually, interestingly, we started with Valentine's Day, but people also used to buy roses for concerts. So a lot of my schoolmates, they had concerts, not necessarily red roses, but some roses. So the rose became a more profitable business. Even the rose seller who we used to work with used to come with us and say if we can collaborate for other schools because their sales increased.
So interesting. Tell me about like the culture in Singapore and how it evolved over the years. I mean, आप लोग कैफे में बैठ के brainstorm करते थे सब या फिर late night Maggie sessions?
मैगी वाले होते नहीं है नहीं तो preference तो मैगी की होती. I was in this school where they really encouraged like all-rounded education. So I still remember when we went to Brazil, we didn't have any money for the air ticket because all these profits from Rose, we could not keep it. So we made a pitch to the principal that we are so poor, and she rose to the prime minister's office, and we actually got our tickets and everything free. So there's a very encouraging culture. Brainstorming तो हर जगह चलती थी, but the one I remember the most was there were these 24/7 shops. We used to sell like cheese fries and super unhealthy coffee, and we used to sneak out of the hostel because there was a curfew, and then you have to wait till the next morning to come back because the hostel would not open. So you used to have cheese fries and just sit there the whole night and discuss like weird things like roast कैसे काट सकते हैं efficiently, and then the people would judge us. But it was a fun time.
Basically, Singapore की Maggie is cheese fries.
Yes, for me, yeah, I ate way too much of that. Yeah.
If you look at SaaS startups specifically,
Yeah.
about 21% of them fail in the first year itself. And most of it is to do with not having that user centricity in mind. And you developed a user research platform. And when I was sort of researching for self-best, I picked out like 30 people I could do customer discovery with first, even before building the product. And then after building the prototype, we gave it in the hands of the users, and we were trying to sort of get some feedback and see what the user has to say, whether it's A/B testing or just getting the right modules in place and elements in place in terms of the UI. So what inspired and sparked that idea for you to build Betafi, which is a user research platform, and specifically transforming from a telecom industry to something which is so user focused? What inspired that?
So in telecom, I actually was there for 5 years, and I had quite a good stint. I had two different jobs. One, I was working in customer care to digitize the service experience, and then I was in product marketing. And both of those jobs, I had good bosses who gave me a lot of leeway to basically experiment and do whatever I want. My first boss, literally, I remember she recognized me as a rebel character, and she gave me like no KPI. You do whatever you want as long as in a year you deliver something. So we had an office in like the nice Orchard Road of Singapore, nice building. But I remember she always recommended if you want to do real meaningful projects, go to the contact centers, whether in Singapore or Malaysia. Even if you're young, doesn't matter. You're just working off a laptop, work off a laptop in a contact center, but you would understand what they would need very intimately, right? So before you go into join Singtel, everyone's like, oh, the customer care is hard. You don't get through the call agent. They can't resolve your problem. And as a customer, I could understand that. But once I used to sit in the call center, I was shocked that they had to navigate 5 to 7 tools. And basically, it's not the customer which is difficult, just the navigation of information is difficult. I mean, it sounds obvious, but when you see it for yourself and how much they struggle and why they keep customer on a hold, it's a different experience, right? So I used to spend hours just watching what they were doing. Initially, I thought I'm creepy, but they made friends with them, and they would explain and bitch about why certain tools are worse than other tools, and that's why customer handling is tough. And I used to bring back some of these insights to my bosses, and they used to like it. But also the other aspect of being in the call center was got relationships from them. Like, so I really understand what the true problems were. So one of my first projects that I did in Singtel, which became big, was actually this product was being built for the network engineers, and I just happened to be in a meeting, and I brought that to the contact center. But when I brought that to the contact center, me and the vendor and the agents worked together, and I didn't have any of the bosses. So we created such a good user interface for it that typically when you, for a company like Singtel, when you introduce a new tool, they have training for like sometimes weeks on end, right? So I bet the training would be a day, but it was half an hour, and everyone was mind blown that you don't need to train them, you don't need to like follow up with them, nag them, they just use it because it solves the problem. But that comes from the fact that I was there and I saw how the tools were so difficult and how they were not married with the user journey. And that was the first insight of a big success I had in Singtel. So the last second Singtel story was that, so I used to do a lot of projects. Most of them did well, some didn't. But one of the projects which we always struggled with were billing. So customers used to call into the contact center and complain about their bill, and the agent tried to resolve it. It never worked. It was horrible. I tried to do projects myself. It didn't work. So one of my thesis from there was that at contact center, you cannot fix billing. You have to fix billing upstream. So when I moved to product marketing and I was involved in all the pricing, I was like, I want to create something totally new, which billing is a non-factor. I want to create like a Netflix or LinkedIn. Even if I pay extra for LinkedIn, I don't blame LinkedIn, but everyone blames Singtel, right? So started working on these side projects. By then I had some other rebels in Singtel who were like my friends. So we, even without any permission, we started building a sketch prototype of the product. We started building a IT infrastructure, basic one, and we did a lot of user interviews. So this product was for the younger audience, and Singtel had management associates. So we used to just bring them for coffee, official coffee, and you just get feedback. So we used to get feedback on the buy flow. We used to get feedback on the brand, every single aspect of it. And one concrete example was we created this fun brand called GOMO, which was get out more often because Singaporeans don't go out so much, and telco as an enabler for that. But we wanted to disassociate it from Singtel, so it was just called GOMO. But when we did user testing, the users were like, no, it should be called GOMO by Singtel because Singtel has a great reputation for the network. This was something I totally didn't believe in, but just from the story, it came through. And over the first year of building, it took us a year to build, but we were just doing user interviews on every single thing, whether to build a web app or an app, and the user interview said, web apps, so build a web app. But when we launched on the day one of launch, with all this user feedback, we estimated we'll get like 1,000 signups. We got 25,000 signups, and the whole call center was flooded, and the whole ops was flooded. And everybody, admins were helping out, right? So that was the first time I saw true PMF, day one launch PMF, and I attribute a lot of that to the user feedback we had done, not once but regularly. Now, stepping back to your original question on why Betafi, which was my company, I felt that this feedback loop should be just the norm in every single product. So I also saw in Singtel a lot of projects didn't work. And a lot of them I felt didn't work either because the boss forced you to do it and you did it, which is whatever. And the other one was we are not doing true customer feedback, or we're doing feedback just for a confirmation bias perspective. But if you just ask people, they'll just tell you brutally. And if you follow to it, the probability of success increases. So I thought there should be a platform to make this the norm instead of just doing it for select projects.
So I think you'd already been through a very rigorous user
Yeah.
centric journey,
Yeah.
as part of both of your projects at Singtel,
Yeah.
and that sort of inspired Betafi. But one of the things that I was also reading about is that since all of these efforts and projects were across Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, were there some region specific, user insights that you had to bring into? And even while you looked at Betafi as a global product, did you had to personalize and localize as per the local geographies, and how did you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So GOMO, if I keep the story forward, it continued to do well. At one point, was contributing 70% of Singtel's new customers. Within like 2 years, it was at 50 million in revenue. It was doing really, really well. And Singtel is a big company, so they launched GOMO in like 7 geographies. And I was involved in different extents in all of them. It was a great learning experience. What was interesting is out of the 7 geographies, it actually failed in 5. But the main reason where it failed in 5 is because they copy pasted GOMO. But we had the brand, we were the same company, we were happy to share. But I think what they should have picked up was learnings, not that exactly get out more often in Singapore resonates because people are sedentary, not sedentary, but always working, but other countries may not be the case, right? So the 2 countries where it worked very interestingly were Indonesia and Philippines. In Philippines, what they ended up realizing is they liked the quirkiness of the brand, but they felt that it was still too conservative for that country. So they went a little bit more liberal than that, and they brought in like GOMO as a way to support like the queer community, and they made a big deal of it supporting homosexual people and gays. And it did really, really well because it stood out. There was no other brand in Philippines that was doing that. A telco brand doing that was crazy. So both in terms of that, in terms of how they made the product different, that was very, very cool. And it did well. So Indonesia was another place where they adapted really well. It was called GOMO in Singapore, but it did not resonate. So they created a new brand called Bayu. And on top of building a new telco brand, they added like podcasts and games, telemedicine, which would make it a very compelling offering. And actually, Bayu is doing really well in Indonesia. So it's interesting to see in Philippines, they adapted the brand itself. But in Indonesia, they totally revamped it and changed the product offering as well.
So the other geographies,
Yeah.
which where it didn't do well, did you actually figure out certain reasons why it didn't do well? And were there any things that they could have done to localize to those geographies that they didn't consider to start with?
Yeah. Like for Australia, I'll give you an example of Australia. There was one project I was very closely involved in, other than Philippines. So I think sometimes because it's doing so well in Singapore, it's driving revenue. There's a temptation to, okay, let's also do it. It'll drive our revenue. But you have to look at the local competitive landscape, right? Australian companies generally already have a really good brand. They push things out there a bit like Philippines. But whereas Philippines had 2 or 3 of these challenger brands, Australia had 15. Singapore had 3. So GOMO had to win 3 or 4 in Singapore, had to win 4 in Philippines, but had to win 15 in Australia. When there are 15 brands and the 16th brand in the market, it's very, very different from a customer perspective, right? All the channels where you can go is gone. So that was one example why you have to look at the market landscape. Another example was Thailand. So in Thailand was interesting. It was ripe for the taking, not the competitive problem like Australia. But in telco, there's always this risk of cannibalization. You launch a new challenger product, what happens to your core business? And you have to take a judgment call because if not, the sale, then everybody will be very lost. So Thailand was always scared of cannibalization of the product. And as a result, they didn't push it out as much as they could. And I felt that if they did, it would have done better.
So, in terms of Singapore as a geography,
Mm.
for entrepreneurs,
Mm.
do you have some tips on, how they can get started and how Singapore can be a good, not so good
Mm.
place to start a company, especially a tech company?
Yeah, I think Singapore, the country and the government is great. They're very, very supportive. In fact, there are multiple grants of 50,000 Sing to 100,000 Sing over different periods to get you started. They're literally free co-working spaces. There are free credits. There are a lot of things to help you get started. So, and also company registration literally takes 1 day and it's like all digital, right? It's amazing. So a lot of the administrative aspects of it and support and grants in Singapore are very, very good. The couple of challenges in Singapore are, one, it's still a very small market. So when you launch a startup, you typically want like 10, 20, 100 customers to just use your product. That's a little bit hard in Singapore. And the other is it's still a little bit of a risk averse culture. So not a lot of people want it because it's not just about starting, but it's also joining startup. You need a critical mass of people who would want to work in startups. But a lot of the best engineers in Singapore end up going to Meta or Google, and that could be one of the challenges of being there. But another great aspect of building from Singapore is if you have a remote team and you access the talent in Southeast Asia, then it's quite easy to get talent there as well.
So that easily goes into our next
Yeah.
question, which is about
Mm.
working in a remote team, and not just a remote team, but also a remote co-founding team.
Mm.
I know part of your
Mm.
entrepreneurship experience had your remote like
Mm.
team not in the same space.
Mm.
So how did you go about that, and especially at Betafi? And where did you meet your co-founder, by the
Yeah, like online dating. No,
way?
I'm kidding. I started Betafy smack in the middle of COVID. In fact, if COVID did not happen, I did not have my midlife crisis to think about what I want to do in life. I might be doing an MBA as any good Indian kid. But I thought like, okay, with COVID, existentialism came, and then you'll reflect on what do you want. So actually, I joined this accelerator called Entrepreneur First, and in Singapore. So we were both in Singapore, and he was part of the accelerator as well. But then my sister was getting married, and I had to come to India. And there was a funny story. I had to pretend I lost my job to come to India. It was really hard to get a flight because the commercials weren't flying. But once I came to India, I was stuck. I couldn't go back to Singapore. So for the first 3 months, we were totally remote. I think what helped is because it's COVID, like at that time, being remote was not so weird. That was just the norm. But also, sometimes it helps to like just get you to focus on someone. So the literally the first 3 months of the company, we worked together. We did user research. He was building prototypes. We even raised a small accelerator round. Literally, it was all remote. I remember we registered our company. We even got 70K in funding, and then I met him for the first time in Singapore. It was actually a good experience. I did. It was not a shock to meet him in person. It was very similar to the remote experience.
And how did you complement your skill sets, and how did that
Hmm.
sort of bring the right co-founding team for Bitafy?
I think for co-founders, you need to have, in my opinion, a aligned value system, but differing skill sets. That between the two of you, you cover a large part of the portfolio, but values align. So for both of us, we were extremely product focused. We didn't need to sell each other on the idea of Beta 5. We believed in user feedback. We were also very focused on, we believe in treating people nicely. We believe in paying people well, keeping the team small. So a lot of things were aligned. And then he was a really good engineer. For example, in the first month when we started working together, he didn't like talking to people so much, and I did. So I did all the user interviews, but he was happy to join. I didn't necessarily like using all the tools because to me it's like just tell me the best one. But he really liked using all the tools, so he went to do a detailed analysis of all 15 tools, and within 2 weeks we had such a good comprehensive market understanding because of our different skill sets that the first round became really easy to raise.
So tell me how you went about building your team, because I, of course, have spoken to you earlier about how
Mhm.
you went about building team at Betterfy, but it'll be lovely if you can share the process. What are the kind of qualities you looked at your team? What is the kind of pay as per the average that you were looking at? And how did you, and what milestones motivated you to hire probably another team or make another department within Betterfy?
So we started in an accelerator, then we got the funding, and then for the next 6 months, it was just the two of us, and he was building, and I was talking to customers. So life was very easy, just two people, no drama, right? So as to say. Also, I think we were lucky that we were just I was talking to customers, he was building, and we were writing content, and that led to our first funding round, like institutional, where we raised 1.3 mil. But until we raised that, we had not hired anybody but interns. But once we got there, the first thing we needed was a good designer because it's a user feedback product, and neither of us were designers. And then we needed a few engineers. So we built the team in blocks, and we hired 2 or 3 people first. The profile we looked for was somebody with 5 to 7 years of experience, so that they understand building products, but also they're hands on. We didn't want to get people managers at the start. Typically, we paid really well. We paid 30 to 50% above market. It both helped close the candidate, but also we had no churn. So we wanted to hire less people with that. Once we hired our first 5 people or so, we realized firstly we can't keep hiring all the seniors, and also it was not needed. So next 5 hires we focused on people who are younger. So what we did was we used to go to these colleges, whether it's NUS and computing and or IIT, and hire interns on like a 6 month, 9 month project. And those that did well, some would self-select and not make it, and some would do really well. Those who did really well, we would convert. So what happened over a year is we had a team of like 13, 14 people, where half are more senior and half are junior but very hungry, and that helped to like balance the compensation as well.
So if we look at how AI is sort of changing the entire landscape when it comes to SaaS as well. We see the global spending in AI has gone up from 2018 to 2025, expected to go at around 119 billion in 2025, and it was at 9.5 billion. So, I mean, it's huge. And so, how do you see that sort of changing SaaS industry as a whole globally? And then, what can Indian startups do to adapt with these changes that are coming with the new AI revolution that's around the corner?
So I think from 2010 to 2020 was like the dream world of SaaS. A lot of it started with like Salesforce, but also companies like Freshworks, Zendesk, and then vertical SaaS. And a lot of point solutions kept coming up. There was even consumer-centric products like Notion and Figma. But what ended up happening for a practical perspective for the end user is you have to manage 50 products. So, for example, when I was managing Betafi, I use a product for CRM for customers, another for inbound email, outbound email, customer support. And it gets overwhelming, not just in terms of spend, but also in terms of just the number of tools you have to do and the cognitive load. The generation of SaaS, what it did was it made it easier for the human operator to interact with software, right? But there was still interaction with software. So I'll give you an example. I was sending emailers to our base using Mailchimp, and Mailchimp is a great tool. And but I would always struggle with center aligning the image. It would annoy the shit out of me. I'm done. I have to go home. I've everything's ready, but where's the center align button, right? And MailChimp expected me to just learn it, and which was fine, but I only used it once a month. I think where I'm personally excited about the AI opportunity is where you move away from software to task. That I would love it if I already have my Notion email in Notion and just click it to MailChimp, and MailChimp can just center line it for me, or AI agent can do it on MailChimp. So the construct of SaaS can change from one where you're helping someone doing the task to actually doing the task, and that's where the opportunity is, in my opinion.
And then how can startups sort of compete with international market,
Mhm.
like when you talk about startups coming in the same domain from US and Europe, where the foundational models in AI are being made, whereas in India that's not the case. So how do Indian startups sort of go about competing in this kind of a...
So one of the interesting learnings I've had in the last 3 months, is I've just been speaking to some friends in Singapore and Southeast Asia about the best-in-class US tools like Sierra AI for customer care or Glean for enterprise search, and just asking why they don't use it. The reality is a lot of those US products are built for a US construct where they do a really good job with like a voice model or a text model, right? But for an end enterprise, you have to build it until production. So, as an example, say you're building a Twitter bot, right? US companies will do a great job answering, or X AI, X bot, right? To answer those questions. But what you also need to build is the integration layer with the customer service system. So, what if the bot doesn't answer? Then who handles it? All these small integrations or tooling also needs to be built. And currently, the US companies are not prioritizing it. I think one opportunity I see for Asian companies is to build like production ready AI. Don't just build a voice model or like a chat model or whatever, but build it such that it's actually built in production. So there are like 100 plus customer care AI tools, but I would say 90% of them don't work because they don't focus on the annoying issues of customer care. So if some company solves for that, I think that's a big opportunity. Another opportunity I see is because of the success of ChatGPT, all the AI implementation is very chat focused in terms of its interface. I don't think that that's the end state. There's a lot of more, given how powerful large language models are, there's a lot more opportunity to think of different ways to it. So, for example, like Intercom does a good job with that AI feature, right? But still Q&A, right? But another way to do it is instead of Q&Aing so much, because texting or typing for the customer is still painful, you just display that feature as a generative UI within the interface. And that could be a much faster resolution than actually thinking about that. So if you think about like currently still old SaaS tools becoming like AI, or slapping AI on top, what does the AI native world look like? I think it has not been built yet, and there's an opportunity for this part of the world to also innovate there, and that would be a great way to compete. The last thing about models is, I think if you're talking about the open internet, the lead in the West is too far ahead. I don't think it makes sense to compete on that. But when we talk about vertical models or vernacular models, maybe there's an opportunity there. But I would actually focus more on the integrations or the UI or UX rather than the models itself.
A lot of companies who are sort of adopting AI, the SaaS companies, sort of building AI models to create chatbots that could work internally for their customers and all of that. I easily see that sort of vanishing very soon with the kind of things that are coming with ChatGPT now, with ChatGPT O1. So, do you think people should wait before they start building these little widgets and little chatbots around things that might just not be valid maybe a year from now?
I personally think they shouldn't wait. I think if you're a new startup just building a wrapper on top of OpenAI and surfacing a chatbot, maybe that in that case I can see a point. But for enterprises, there's a lot of knowledge within the enterprise which ChatGPT or any of the other models don't have access to, and you can expose it through RAG and other things. But even in that case, they already have existing chat interface or chat tool, right? Or another onboarding tool. I really think time is now to experiment with, let's say, an onboarding and a chat tool and a new AI and how all of these coexist with each other. The time to experiment is now. So even if ChatGPT gets better, this will only get better for you.
So, okay, I have an interesting idea here. If you were to apply this to Betafi, how would you do that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think that I'll give you an example.
Because it'll really inspire the other SaaS founders, who have existing products and how they can go about sort of building that sort of an ecosystem that can help them going forward.
Let me give you 30 seconds of how Betafi works, so that it's contextual. So you go to Betafi, it's a tool for user researchers. So you go in, you write your project goal, ask a set of questions, add a Figma prototype. Then you get on call with users, typically 5 to 10 users. As they talk, you take notes, you can use some of the cool tooling. And at the end of it, we give you insights, right? And what we started doing with some of the AI experimentation is we give you automatic summaries, insights across calls, and some of those tools were good. I think where the opportunity is in the future, or wherever the tool can be, is given that you've done so many calls, what you should come and do is, hey, I'm building this new feature for this purpose. This is my audience. And then let Betafi create the list of questions which you can review. After you review, you list the list of customers, and the AI can actually do the interview themselves. They will still get the video if you want to watch it, but it's an AI thing, so that it can get done in one day, and then we give you insights. I think the main advantage is because it saves you time on like interviewing the user and all the scheduling that comes with it. More people can use the tool. So today, Betafi is used by like user researchers whose full-time job is to do these things. But as an XPM or engineer or a designer, they might want to do user feedback as well, but they may not have the bandwidth. But if the whole process was automated, then that would become exciting. So you can become like an AI agent for user research, not just a tool that helps with some parts of the user research process.
The other question I have around is the metrics, right, that are used in the SaaS industry very commonly, like it's the MRR, LTV, the CAG, So if you can do a rundown of what are the abbreviations, what do they stand for, what do they mean, and then what are the key metrics that you have seen have been useful in your journey with Betafi, right? In terms of, probably you saw that the churn rate is high, and that was a flag for you to sort of look deeper into what could be the possible reasons and how you went about solving those issues. Yeah, if you could just do a little bit of rundown on metrics.
Sure. So I'll start with the funny metrics, which a lot of people use, but are so. I'll give you two examples. One is from an investor fundraising perspective, and the other is just day-to-day uses. So typically, when you're building a startup and you're fundraising, you have to come up with a TAM, and then there's a TAM, and there's a SAM, and a SOM. So TAM is total addressable market, service addressable, and service. I don't even know what SOM is. And
obtainable. Serviceable, obtainable, I think.
If you say so, then sure. And then you draw three concentric circles, and then the opportunity is 10 billion. And then everyone laughs at it because it's such a Excel exercise, right? I think TAM is important in terms of understanding for bottom up how many people will pay a certain amount of money for your tool. but it's just overkill in my to go to SOM, and if someone can like say SOM so accurately, I'm impressed. Must be an ex-consultant, but I think TAM SOM SAM SOM was one interesting thing. So I used to stick to TAM because beyond that it was too much Excel. The other was SQL, MQL. So the concept is when people will come to your website, so X% of them will sign up for demos, Y% of them would be qualified, right? So there were sales, qualified leads, and I don't know what MQL was. So I think it's a fair process, but sometimes we go overkill with that. The idea is to say that okay, you want qualified leads to talk to, which is it's a great idea, but just all these metrics are too much, right? Now, so these were the two funny metrics, which always, I mean, I knew what they were, but I never understood the usefulness. Um, I think when it comes to metrics, from a business running perspective, I thought, especially given we just came through like a funding winter of sorts, runway was the most important thing. Like, given your burn and given your revenues, like how long can you last? That was the most important thing. And honestly, the two, then if you break down runway, it comes back to like what is your burn, and in our SaaS startup it's still like salaries. So what is your monthly like expenditure on that, and then what's your MRR? So MRR is just monthly recurring revenue. It's important because if it keeps growing, that's one of the things where SaaS is good. But one of the things I learned from running the business was there are leading indicators and a lagging indicator. While MRR is great, but it's often a lagging indicator, right? That you spend some effort in getting customers and how many of them are paying. And then leading indicator is if today you can in quarter one tell you, given the state today, what will happen in the next 6 months. So I spend a lot of effort with Betafi in the leading indicators over time. So we were a bottoms up motion. We were not outbound sales. So we had a cool Zoom integration. We had people coming through us from the Zoom interface. So roughly 400, 500 net new users every month. But what we saw very early was once a cohort of users came in, they were not active on the second or third month, right? And we were like looking at MRR, and sometimes even MRR is good because of something else. But we should really focused on, from those 500 people, how many of them get to paying customers in 2 months or 3 months, because that will ultimately affect your MRR. So onboarding became a super critical thing that we started monitoring. And similarly, we realized that even when we talk about churn, so user research is interesting that you don't have like a daily use product. It's more like a monthly or even a quarterly use product. So it took a while to understand that if someone's not doing it in 2 months, not using a product, it might mean nothing. But if they're not using it in 3 months and 4 months, then the churn is coming. So just getting that timing or understanding of how long something the usage is before the churn happens. So churn prediction became a very important thing. So actual churn is just like, it's like a report card. You can't do much about it. But what is the effort you're doing to prevent that? That's where a lot of focus became.
Very interesting. Like just seeing like how different metrics sort of are interlinked
Yeah.
and sort of play a bigger role when you look at your churn rate.
Yeah.
So maybe there is one key metric you're looking for, but
Yeah.
then there's metrics that are sort of leading up to that.
Right.
Tell us about how your time at the National University of Singapore and the University of Pennsylvania sort of impact your career, and how are the two different? Singapore and US are totally different geographies to look at. What are the key learnings you took from each of them, and how did you put them in your journey?
I was actually went to NUS, and UPenn was actually an exchange program I was on. The cultures can't be more different. Singapore is a very quiet place, so I remember lectures and tutorials are very similar. So when someone asks a question, it's like pin drop silence. Nobody wants to speak unless there are marks for class participation, right? So the learning is a lot more by studying, independent work, hard work. But NUS had a lot of opportunities. So I remember I was vice president of the Entrepreneurship Society. I used to host ministers quite often. So I thought at that age, hosting ministers in Singapore is quite common. And ever since I've graduated, I've never hosted a minister again. UPenn was very different because people always share their opinions. So to me, that suited my style more. So if you're talking about pricing or entrepreneurship, when different perspectives come together, it's easier to learn. Also, when I was in Philadelphia, I was doing an internship at a healthcare startup as well, which gave me an opportunity to look into the healthcare market as well as take classes at Penn. So it was a difficult schedule. but this learning from classmates, learning from people with very diverse perspectives. NUS is already diverse, but UPenn had way more nationalities, as well as working in a startup was a great all-round experience about UPenn, which I appreciate.
So tell us about that specific moment from all of your global experiences, whether it was at university or working at Singtel, doing different products for Philippines, Indonesia, Australia. Any moment that you can share that actually changed the way you looked at entrepreneurship?
So I think it happened much before that. When I was in high school and I was doing the entrepreneurship stuff, one of the things I did was like community service in Thailand, and we were teaching kids of who were abandoned by their parents with this NGO, and like it just so happened at that time there was also a military coup when we were there, so I had to fly back in a military plane. Uh, but I think the common theme with all of these experiences are as human beings, we're all very similar. So people want to be heard. If you're kind, people respond well. But at the same time, there are cultural nuances of every place which you have to both understand and respect. So if you work in Singapore, there's a certain work culture you have to adhere to. For example, being on time, being person who, if you say something, do something. If you're in Australia, you have to speak well, you have to be more collaborative, and every country has their own nuances. I think being in Thailand in that culture in the middle of a coup, Thai had their own culture, right? And it kind of ingrained in me that whichever country you go to, just learn from there. It's not so hard. Like if you can survive in a military coup, you can survive anywhere. But you have to spend some time with the cultural nuances. So bring it back to startup. I think a lot of founders from India, me included, want to build in India and sell in US. And we start outbound marketing and we scale it, and it doesn't work, and we get frustrated. And I went through that experience where selling in US was much harder compared to other countries until I went to SF myself, and suddenly selling there was easier. And the main thing that changed is just the local context. I think there needs to be, while all these campaigns are good and necessary from a practical perspective, you have to spend time understanding the unique culture of that place. So if you think like a person who's SF and you're bombarded with 100 inbound campaigns, you would be almost immune to that, right? And it's sometimes hard to appreciate that selling from India. So I feel in my sales approach, which I think helped in Betafy, just that effort in understanding the person, what are they thinking about, what is priority for them, it makes the sales thing much, much easier than otherwise it would be.
So, every founder needs certain tools and applications to keep themselves productive. We all know how entrepreneurship is. Founders, especially for the first 2 years, are single man armies. So it's just the co-founders and a room full of lot of ideas, right? So, what are some of the tools and applications that you swear by and you would recommend other founders to use?
Yeah, so I really, really like Calendly. I swear by it. It's one of the I'm not a very I don't pay for a lot of tools, but that's one of the few tools I pay for. Because I think just scheduling meetings and rescheduling is such an annoyance, right? And now there are other tools like Calendly, but I would definitely recommend investing in one of those. The other one I really like is Notion, for how flexible the tool is in terms of bringing different things together, in terms of organizing yourself both personally and company, and then publishing whatever you want to publish. Those are the tools I use in real life, like a lot. The other ones I've recently experimented is I'm trying to learn how to build an agent. I'm pretty bad at it, but both Crew AI and Anthropic desktop application, they're pretty good at getting it there, but I'm just starting to dabble in those.
So, talking about this itch about creating agents, so is there any specific tech trend that you're really excited about in 2025 and then other entrepreneurs should also look at?
Yeah, I mean, if I say AI, I would be too mainstream, right?
A little more specific, like,
uh, yeah, so I think like there's this new concept, new buzzword, if you will, that has been coming, is service as software instead of software as service. And it is getting a lot of content out there. I've been binging a lot of that content and podcasts, but I do think there's value in that, because I really believe there will be a seminal shift from like tools where you go and do your work to tools that do your work for you. So I've started seeing some of my own friends who used to 2 3 years ago build, for an example, a Chrome extension that does revenue reconciliation for you, which sounds like a great tool. and it was not so successful. And now what they're doing is, I do your revenue reconciliation for you, right? They're still using the same agents, but they're doing it themselves. So shifting from a tool that does revenue reconciliation to doing revenue reconciliation, to me, is like a crazy shift, and I think that will have a big impact. So as India especially has a ton of service companies who build software, which is very customized. If there's a way to productize it where you end up doing the work for your client, I think that would be a big trend that I'm personally excited about.
Have you heard about Builder.ai?
Yeah.
What is the perspective? Because it's a productized service platform
Yeah.
of sorts. So, would love to know your perspective on a model like that.
I think it's good. I am even more excited about like industries which like, again, for all of us, we're always on top of all the tech companies and what they are doing it, but they also, tech companies also have a lot of people who are experimenting in AI. I'm excited about industries which are not like necessarily, they would never go to Anthropic and try out their tool, like an accounting firm, like a legal firm.
Mhm.
Like I'm looking at my telco days. And I think so. Builder.ai is good in terms of tooling. It has to be paired with great understanding of a certain vertical or a certain workflow. I am excited about two things in the service as software thing. One is the understanding of workflow, and the other is how do you innovate on UX, right? Where both, because people would not change to, you can technically make a canvas like Builder.ai with a lot of agents, but no normal person thinks like that today, other than the early majority, right? So for a normal person who's using their tools every day, how do you integrate into their workflows is what I get excited about.
Service as a software?
Yes.
Okay. So, service as a software sort of, I mean, is it something like a managed service? Like, is it a different alias for managed services on top of products?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's like software which is like, I'll give you Betafi and you go and use it and do your own research. And then there's a research agency where you give them requirements and then they would go and give you a report. Uh, Services software lies somewhere in the middle of that, where it's more towards the managed service than to the software. So you still give the requirements, like a PRD example. In the Betafi example, you give a PRD. So my PRDs are my questions, and you give it to this company, right? But in a service company where this company would have done all the work, AI agents would do all the work, right? But instead of the client using all these agents, the service industry does the agents, but the end outcome is the same. You still get the service report. So if you think about like, another example is data migration. There are a lot of companies that help corporates do data migration, and it's a very, very time consuming process, right? So you can build AIs that matches the databases as well, but there are also AIs that can do the coordination between clients. So I think the challenge would be which parts of the offering do you productize? Because currently the service model is very much custom build after custom build, but you have to have some element of replication across clients for it to really scale like software.
So, one of the things that you focused on was having that vertical specific knowledge. So, when it comes to service as a software specifically, what are some of the verticals you have looked at and you feel there is an extensive opportunity to make a change when it comes to giving service as a software?
I'm personally very excited about healthcare because healthcare is so fragmented. The access is so, there's a power law and everything. Like wealth is accumulated among a few, but I feel healthcare is a basic right. And it's one of the interesting things both in the developed world and the developing world. Easy access to quality healthcare is not good, and I personally feel AI would really help with that. But in order for AI doctor to happen, there's in so many systems the information is all over the place. I personally think there can be like 1,000 service as software companies who just build for healthcare, which focus on a certain data set. So for example, let's say in India there's a company that links the EHR together for all the hospitals. Now technically the government is doing it with the UHI initiative, but I think while UHI is amazing, there needs to be a layer that can transport data from an individual hospital to UHI. So healthcare is definitely some industry I'm excited about. Um, I think if I step back, anything which should be more accessible, but it's not, like a lawyer. Like if you've been in a court case in India, it's such a pain in the ass, right? And I think everyone's well intentioned, but it's just the population and the load. But again, if somewhere where AI can really meaningfully help with that, and the last thing is education. So again, I as someone who has been to college, I do feel a lot of the college education may or may not be relevant for the corporate world. And more importantly, I feel people should be allowed to choose whatever they want to study. So I do think that like AI can have a big impact on all of those things. Yeah.
No, definitely. I think all of those industries
Yeah.
need real change at this point.
Mm.
But if I were to ask you,
Yeah.
one random industry you would want to have a
Yeah.
startup in,
Yeah.
whether it's like a snail race competition
Yeah.
or something quirky, what would it be?
I've always have an interesting relationship with social media, and
Mhm.
I'm one of those who both consumes a lot of social media and also like hates it a lot. So, for example, I've never had an Instagram account, but I spend way too much time on LinkedIn. Um, I think the world in general is becoming deeply polarized. If you see any of the elections happening, and a lot of times people in the liberal bubble just look at what like the Democrats are great or the Trump is great, whatever Modi is great, right? It doesn't matter. I really feel there should be a social media that kind of is centrist and gives you exposure to the other side of the equation. Now, that would go against everything the way humans think and advertising dollars. But I would love to have a platform which is more calm, is not so crazy, is not always telling me Saif Ali Khan is about to die. I would want to see like more objective reporting and more all-rounded reporting. Nothing against Saif Ali Khan, but yeah, just as an example, something which is away from clickbait. And similarly, I would love to use Instagram if people are not putting their amazing life all the time, but I don't want to see the best life or the worst life, but just an average day. And I think even in on LinkedIn, everyone's just always virtue signaling all the time. So if any platform anyone can build which is more authentic and just gives the real thing, I would be it would be very exciting to see that happen.
I
Yeah.
think that might not even take a new platform
Mm.
because the elements would still remain the same. Same.
Mm.
It is all about branding those platforms in a
Mm.
way that people put that kind of content.
Mm.
So don't you think it's more about the content curation or the kind of signals the branding of these platforms are
Yeah.
giving the content creators
Yeah.
instead of the platform itself?
I think it goes back to algorithms and incentives. And again, algorithm is the hardest one to think through. Like, why would they change it? But the reality is, again, back to the Saif Ali Khan example. If you post about that, it does give you a lot of views, right? Or if you say somebody lost 40 kg weight and then people will love it, right? If someone had lost 5 kg and I kept it down, nobody cares because it's not extreme, right? So there's that human tendency to go for the extreme things, but I think there's an audience which is beyond that. My gut is we start there with a small niche audience. So in US, I think Blue Sky is starting to do that, where it's like Twitter but not as extreme. But it's also niche now. My hope is more things like that come up for different domains where you're not always posturing all the time.
I know that you listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
Tell us about your favorite podcasters and maybe even quote one of your favorite podcasts.
Yeah, I listen to way too much, too many podcasts. I think I have 4 or 5 people who I listen to regularly, and I like them for different reasons. So I originally got into podcasting because of Tim Ferriss and how deep he goes into the audience and the different variety of guests he has from different domains. So it's like learning about a musician or like a magician who I would keep binging startup content and you would not do that. So I admire that. I also like Lex Friedman a lot. One is his whole nerdy vibe and and he's so serious, but also because he really, I think my challenge with any of these mediums is people not presenting an objective perspective, but I think Lex Friedman does a really good job with that. And then everybody has this this interest in drama, right? And for that, the All In podcast is good, where they give spicy takes and it's funny and it's more of that. So those are my 3 favorite ones. I think in Indian content, and I hope there are more Indian podcasters as well. But I like Raj Shamani's podcast when some of his guests are really good, but not all of them.
And so also tell us about some of your favorite books and maybe quote something from them,
I used to read a lot more books, but recently a little bit less.
especially for founders.
Yeah, so there are different genre of books. I think I believe in philosophy a lot, way too much. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius was really good. It's a slow read, but was good. I also like this book called So Good That They Can't Ignore You. I think startups is a lot of like ups and downs and like a lot of externalities that can affect you, but if you focus on yourself, I mean, there's no guarantee of success, but it helps you deal with it. Recently, I've been reading Deep Work and Slow Productivity, just because you don't want to be in rat race all the time and just focus. I'm very intrigued by how can you work like 8 or 10 hours, not like 16 hours, and get stuff done, which is not always possible. But I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
So, if you could have an AI assistant and there was one quirky thing they could do for you, what would it be?
Yeah, I can give you 10 ideas. Like, I'll give you top three, top five I've been experimenting with recently myself, both building it and seeing if there are agents for it. One was to file my company's taxes. It's an interesting process. Our companies in Singapore tax process is easier, but still you have to do accounting and so on. So I was experimenting with uploading Excel sheets and doing it. The problem is it can give me an accounting sheet, and then you have to verify it yourself. And I like to think I'm good at accounting, but not that good. So I have to still call my accountant. That was one example. Another example was I have a lot of weird ideas, especially in the recent phase, and I want to mock it and building in Figma and stuff. It takes a lot of time. So I've been looking at tools where you can describe your idea high level and then it pops up a prototype. There are tools like that. What I would really like to do is to give it more inputs and then do it. And if there was a humanoid robot, the one thing I would love for it to do is to iron clothes. I think ironing is such a pain in the ass that that would be the first use case I would pay for. Yeah.
So, which is your favorite AI tool to use right now? Like, is it more like ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity? What is it? Which team are you on and why?
I'm definitely on the Perplexity team mainly because I got a free pro subscription when I bought a Rabbit R1, and I genuinely think for a lot of things where the search can be ad influenced, Perplexity does a really good job because Google's half a page of ads are just bad. I still use ChatGPT quite a bit because it was the first tool you use, and it's interesting for a workflow like writing a blog post or a social post. I started using ChatGPT, and I still continue to use it. So that's still the dominant use. Recently, I started to use Claude a little bit more from Anthropic, mainly because I loved their desktop agent building tool, and so it got influenced by that. So not very passionate about any of the tools, but try to dabble in all of that. Have not used a lot of Gemini for some reason.
So, let me ask it this way. If you were to pay for any of these tools, which tool will it be?
Yeah, I'm payment is
every month,
yeah,
without churn.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I'll look at which has the best promo code, but I think as of now I would pay for Perplexity, but I think it's soon becoming a Claude. Yeah, but as of today, I would pay for Perplexity.
So now we have come to an end for our podcast for today on SaaS. Do make sure if you have any questions to comment on the comment box below. Like and subscribe to our channel for regular updates on our podcast. And let's meet next week to get inspired for building amazing products for you, yourself, and the world.